What if there once was a dazzling civilization, greater than any we know, that vanished overnight? Imagine a vast island kingdom, filled with temples and palaces, with harbours where ships carried goods across endless seas, and rulers whose fleets rivaled the greatest empires of history. And then, without warning, it was gone. Swallowed by the ocean, erased from the land, remembered only in whispers and fragments of ancient texts. This is the story of Atlantis, a name that has echoed across time like a haunting memory. For more than 2,000 years, people have asked the same question. Was Atlantis real, or was it only a tale? The first account comes from 360 before Common Era, when the Greek philosopher Plato wrote of Atlantis in two dialogues called Timaeus and Critias. In them, he described a mighty island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. Atlantis, he said, was a land of wealth and power, but also of pride and corruption. In his telling, the gods punished the kingdom with a single devastating catastrophe, sending it beneath the waves. For his students, perhaps it was a moral story. For later generations, it became the seed of an endless mystery. Centuries passed, and the story lingered in shadows. But in 1882, a Minnesota congressman named Ignatius Donnelly reignited the world's fascination. He published Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, a book that argued Atlantis was not myth but history. Donnelly claimed it was the cradle of all ancient civilizations. He compared Egyptian pyramids with Mesoamerican temples, suggesting they were echoes of Atlantean culture. His book was wildly popular. It sparked debates, inspired explorers, and transformed Atlantis into more than just a philosophical tale. It became a possibility. By the mid-20th century, Atlantis had moved from libraries and lecture halls into the imagination of millions. It appeared in science fiction novels, in comic books, and in television shows. The 1,960 seconds brought a wave of fascination that never truly ended. In 2001, Disney released Atlantis, The Lost Empire, giving the myth new life for younger audiences. And in 2018, Aquaman introduced Atlantis once more as a vast and hidden underwater world. Each retelling added new layers, shaping Atlantis into a cultural icon that crossed the boundary between history and fantasy. But behind cartoons, novels, and films lies a deeper question. What if Atlantis was more than a story? What if, thousands of years ago, there truly was a civilization advanced beyond its time, erased not by imagination, but by disaster? That is the journey we begin tonight. We will look at the facts that archaeology and science can offer. We will also explore the forbidden theories, from lost technologies to cataclysmic events that mainstream history often sets aside. Some of what you hear is grounded in evidence. Some remains unproven and debated. Yet together, these pieces form a picture of one of the greatest mysteries ever told. If this mystery captures your imagination, stay with us until the end. And if you enjoy these journeys into the past, remember to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let us begin. The story of Atlantis begins with Plato, writing in Athens in the 4th century before Common Era. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he told of a great island far beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Plato said the tale did not come from his imagination. It was passed down through Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver who had travelled to Egypt 200 years before. In the city of Sais, Solon met priests who guarded ancient records. From them he heard of an empire that had once ruled the seas. It was rich and powerful, but its pride led it into war against Athens. Then, in a single day and night, disaster struck, and the island was lost beneath the waves. What shocked readers most was not the description of Atlantis, but the time Plato gave it. He claimed the island had existed 9,000 years before his own lifetime. That would place Atlantis around 9,600 before Common Era, at the very end of the last ice age. This was a time when glaciers were retreating and sea levels were rising across the world. To say that a great civilization had thrived in such an age seemed almost impossible. Even in antiquity, people doubted the claim. Aristotle, Plato's own student, dismissed it as an invention. Yet the strange details remained: a distant island, an impossible date, and a sudden catastrophe. These were not easily forgotten. For centuries, Atlantis lived on in whispers. Then, in the 19th century, archaeology uncovered something new. In 1883, on the island of Santorini, excavations revealed the buried city of Akrotiri. Long ago, around 1600, before Common Era, a massive volcanic eruption had destroyed it. Beneath the ash, archaeologists found paved streets, tall houses, and painted walls. They realized the city had belonged to the Minoan civilization, a people who flourished across Crete and the Aegean. To many, the story of the Minoans sounded like Atlantis brought to life, a culture advanced for its time, wiped away by a natural disaster, its ruins hidden for thousands of years. But there was one problem. The eruption of Santorini happened in the Bronze Age, nearly 8,000 years later than Plato's date. The ruins of Akrotiri showed how a society could vanish, but they did not match the world of 9,600 before Common Era. For this reason, some scholars believe Plato had used the memory of Santorini as inspiration, while others insisted that his timeline could not be ignored. In 1926, a Scottish writer named Lewis Spence took a different path. He published a book called The Problem of Atlantis, in which he argued that Plato's account should be read literally. Spence claimed Atlantis had been a real continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He imagined it as a land bridge connecting Europe and the Americas, a place where ancient cultures had once met before being swallowed by the sea. His ideas were rejected by professional historians, but they caught the public imagination. In Spence's vision, Atlantis was not a parable or a memory of the Aegean. It was a real land that had vanished, leaving only myths behind. The legend did not fade. In the 21st century, researchers began to use new tools to search for traces of lost worlds. Between 2011 and 2021, a team studied the marshlands of Doñana in southern Spain, near the city of Huelva. They used satellites, sonar, and ground-penetrating radar to look beneath the mud. What they found was curious. Circular and rectangular shapes, hidden below the surface, appeared in the scans. To some, these shapes resembled the rings of land and water described by Plato in his account of the Atlantean capital. The location near the Strait of Gibraltar made the discovery even more intriguing. Could this marsh have once been the site of Atlantis? Skeptics were not convinced. They pointed out that marshes often form circular patterns naturally. Without artifacts, no one could prove the connection. Still, the images sparked debate and renewed interest in Spain as a possible location. Another clue had appeared a few years earlier. In 2005, seismic surveys were carried out off the coast of Cadiz. Deep under the Atlantic, researchers detected circular structures on the seabed. Some believed they could be the eroded remains of ancient constructions. Others thought they were only the product of geology and the shifting ocean floor. Once again, the evidence was uncertain, but the discovery added another site to the long list of places linked to Atlantis. Each of these discoveries has added to the mystery. None has solved it. Atlantis remains suspended between memory and imagination, tied to questions of where it was, when it lived, and from whom the story first came. And though the answers are uncertain, the search continues, just as it has since Plato first set down the tale more than 2,000 years ago. Still listening? Please give this video a like to support us. If Atlantis truly once existed, it was not only a place on a map but a living world. Imagine streets filled with colour, harbours crowded with sails, and halls where water flowed through hidden channels. Glimpses of such a world come to us from the ground, from the words of philosophers, from maps drawn centuries ago, and from ideas that refuse to fade. Together, they sketch the outline of how life may have been lived in a civilization that still captures the human imagination. The first glimpse comes from the island of Crete. In 1900, Arthur Evans began digging at Knossos. What he uncovered was more than rubble. He revealed the remains of a palace that stretched over acres, a labyrinth of corridors and chambers rising in multiple stories. Walls were covered with frescoes, bright images of dolphins leaping in blue water, young athletes grasping bulls by their horns, and processions carrying offerings through ceremonial courts. Beneath the floors ran stone drains linked to terracotta pipes that carried water in and waste out. Evans even found the remains of flushing toilets, designed more than 3,000 years ago. To walk through Knossos today is to see the shadow of a society that cared not only for grandeur but also for comfort and planning. It suggests how people of the ancient world might have mastered their surroundings with skill, leaving behind places of both beauty and utility. Plato, writing many centuries before Evans, gave his own description of how the great island was arranged. In Critias, set down around 360 before Common Era, he wrote of a city built in circles. Rings of land and water encircled one another, connected by wide canals that flowed out to the sea. Bridges crossed the waterways, and ships passed easily through harbours that opened to the ocean. At the very centre, a temple rose in honour of Poseidon. Its walls gleamed with silver, gold, and orichalcum, a substance said to shine like fire. Columns soared upward, and statues of gods and kings watched over the people. Beyond the temple stretched markets and storehouses, filled with goods brought in by fleets of ships. Plato described an island navy unmatched in power, with hundreds of warships ready to sail. The picture he painted was not of a scattered settlement, but of an organized capital planned with intention, alive with ceremony, and strong with military might. Centuries after Plato, a different kind of clue appeared, one that carried the lines of coastlines and oceans. In 1929, scholars in Istanbul studied a map drawn by the Ottoman admiral Piri Reis in the year 1513. The parchment startled them. It showed the western coast of Africa and the eastern edge of South America, with accuracy far beyond what was expected for its time. Some even saw in its shapes the outlines of lands across the Atlantic, places unknown to explorers of the early 16th century. Many historians argued that the map was compiled from older charts, passed down and copied through the ages. But for others, it suggested something more, a survival of knowledge from a civilization that had mapped seas long before the age of Columbus. Whether legend or memory, the Piri Reis map became part of the way Atlantis is imagined, not only as a land of ships, but as a culture that understood the wider world. In 2011, archaeology once more added new threads to this picture. Studies of artifacts from Crete and across the Mediterranean revealed how far Minoan merchants had travelled. Pottery from their workshops appeared in Egypt. Copper ingots from Cyprus and tin from Anatolia reached their smiths. Obsidian tools linked them to volcanic islands hundreds of miles away. These finds confirmed that their ships moved constantly across the sea, trading, bartering, and exchanging ideas. They carried more than goods. They carried stories, symbols, and customs that shaped the cultures they touched. To think of Atlantis in this light is to see it as a place where harbours thrived, where sailors guided their vessels by the stars, and where wealth flowed in from every corner of the sea. Not all images of Atlantis come from excavation or classical text. In 1974, Charles Berlitz published The Mystery of Atlantis. His vision was different, more daring. He wrote of enormous crystals that captured energy, transmitting it across the city, lighting its towers, and powering machines. In his account, the people of Atlantis were inventors who tapped forces that remain beyond our science. The idea was speculative, and historians rejected it, but the image took hold in the minds of readers. Atlantis became not only a society of palaces and fleets, but a place where the boundaries of technology reached into the fantastic. Even as legend, the idea of crystal energy offered a glimpse of what human ambition might dream to create. Taken together, these fragments allow us to picture Atlantis in its fullness. Palaces rising above the earth, painted with colour and designed with skill. Cities planned in rings, crossed by canals and bridges. Harbours alive with the sails of merchant ships and the oars of war galleys. Maps suggesting knowledge of faraway coasts. Trade routes binding distant lands into a single network of exchange. And visions, however speculative, of a people harnessing energies that glittered like light in stone. Atlantis has always been more than a story of splendour. It is also a puzzle, wrapped in mysteries that have surfaced again and again over the last century. Some came from the sea, others from the sky, and others still from the imagination of writers who refused to let the legend fade. In 1968, off the quiet island of Bimini in the Bahamas, divers slid beneath the water and saw something that took their breath away. Stretching out before them was a line of massive stones, flat and squared, set side by side like the paving of a giant road. The blocks continued into the distance for nearly half a mile, forming what looked like a highway leading into the deep. Photographs captured the sight of men swimming above the limestone slabs, their bodies dwarfed by the size of the formation. News of the Bimini Road travelled quickly, and many wondered if this was the first glimpse of Atlantis itself, lying just beneath the waves of the Caribbean. Almost a decade later, another clue came not from divers but from the pages of a book. In 1977, historian Charles Hapgood set out a daring theory that the entire crust of the Earth could shift in a single motion. He called it Earth crust displacement. In his view, the continents had once stood in different places, only to be dragged into new latitudes when the outer shell of the planet slid across the mantle. He pointed to maps that seemed to show Antarctica free of ice, suggesting it had once been temperate and habitable. If such movements had happened, whole civilizations might have been torn from their homes, drowned, or buried beneath ice sheets. Hapgood's words conjured an image of Atlantis not just sinking, but being erased as the Earth itself shifted under its feet. As technology advanced, new mysteries appeared in unexpected ways. In 2009, users of Google Earth turned their gaze to the Atlantic Ocean. Scanning the seabed, they spotted an image that set the internet alight. On their screens appeared a vast grid, lines running for dozens of miles in neat rectangles, like the plan of a city frozen beneath the sea. The pattern lay west of the Canary Islands, exactly where some had long suspected Atlantis might rest. Screenshots spread across forums and news sites, showing what looked like avenues, intersections, and blocks of a drowned metropolis. For a moment, it seemed that satellites had finally unveiled the secret that explorers had sought for centuries. Later, the lines were explained as artifacts of sonar mapping, but the memory of that strange digital city lingers. Atlantis revealed, not in ruins, but in glowing pixels across a computer screen. Not all visions of Atlantis came from beneath the water. In 2017, writer Graham Hancock released Magicians of the Gods, a book that drew attention to a catastrophe from the deep past. Around 10,800 before Common Era, he wrote, the Earth was struck by fragments of a comet, igniting fires across continents and plunging the planet back into Ice Age conditions. The period is known to science as the Younger Dryas, a time of sudden cooling and turmoil. Hancock described torrents of meltwater rushing across the land, coastlines swallowed, and ancient cultures swept away in days. He placed Atlantis within this storm of fire and flood, a civilization erased when the heavens themselves turned against the earth. His words painted a vision of cities collapsing under the weight of disaster, their memory carried forward only in myths of gods and floods. 1 year later, in 2018, a team of scientists working near the Azores Islands recovered sediment cores from the seabed. Long cylinders of sand, clay, and shell were drawn up from the deep, each layer a page in the story of the ocean. Within them lay traces of a colossal tsunami, dated to around 11,000 years ago. The deposits spoke of waves higher than houses, surging across the mid-Atlantic with unstoppable force. The Azores, rising in lonely silence from the sea, had long been imagined as fragments of Atlantis itself. Now the evidence of giant waves striking that very region brought new energy to the old vision. Islands swallowed by water, their people carried into the depths as the ocean rose without warning. And yet, if a city so grand once rose upon the seas, how could it have disappeared in a single night, leaving nothing but silence and memory? Plato wrote that Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and a single night of catastrophe. Around 9,600 before Common Era, he said, storms and floods rose without warning, and the great island was swallowed by the sea. Towers collapsed, ships were pulled under, and by dawn nothing remained but an empty ocean. His account gave the story its most haunting image, a mighty world that vanished overnight. Centuries later, scholars began to search for real events that could match the sudden destruction. In 1939, Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos offered one of the first concrete proposals. He turned to the island of Santorini, once known as Thera, where a volcano had erupted with extraordinary violence around 1,600 before Common Era. The eruption sent columns of ash miles into the sky, darkening the daylight for weeks. Across the sea, layers of pumice settled like snow. The force of the blast collapsed the island's center, creating a caldera that filled with water. Tsunamis raced outward, striking the coast of Crete with waves high enough to swamp harbors and smash fleets of ships against the shore. Minoan palaces were covered in ash, their storerooms buried under rubble. For Marinatos, this was not just another disaster of the Bronze Age. It was the sudden end of a maritime power, remembered in later generations as the fall of Atlantis. In the decades that followed, more traces of great waves were sought beneath the sea. In 2005, researchers drilled cores of sediment from the Mediterranean seabed. They pulled up long cylinders of sand, shell, and silt, each layer a page from the history of the ocean. Within them, scientists found deposits that bore the signature of tsunamis, thick bands of coarse sand carried inland, and then buried under centuries of sediment. These hidden layers revealed that the Mediterranean had been struck many times by enormous waves. Such tsunamis would have torn across coastal settlements with unstoppable force, drowning entire towns in a matter of hours. To imagine them is to see lights extinguished, ships overturned, and families swept into the dark sea without time to escape. Some researchers looked not only to the earth and sea, but to the sky. In 2007, the physicist Richard Firestone and his colleagues introduced a theory that around 10,800 before Common Era, at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, the Earth had been struck by fragments of a massive comet. The impact, they argued, unleashed fires across continents, melted ice sheets, and sent floods surging over the land. In their vision, it was not a volcano or a wave, but fire from above that erased entire cultures. Forests burned, animals vanished, and human societies collapsed into ruin. If true, Atlantis may have been one of the victims of this cosmic strike, a city consumed as the heavens themselves turned violent. Modern archaeology has continued to return to the Aegean for answers. Between 2021 and 2022, researchers used advanced sonar to create three-dimensional maps of the seabed around Santorini. Their scans revealed the exact pattern of the island's collapse, showing how the eruption's fury had torn away massive sections of land. Computer models suggested that waves from the event reached staggering heights, striking Crete and other islands with force enough to flatten towns and sink entire fleets in a single night. These images, generated by modern technology, made it easier to picture how an island empire could disappear so suddenly. For the first time, Plato's description of destruction in one day and one night had a tangible parallel in geological evidence. But there are voices that see Atlantis not as a lost city, but as a story. In 2010, Greek scholars revisited Plato's Timaeus and Critias, and concluded that the island was never meant to be taken literally. They argued that Atlantis was a parable, a cautionary tale about hubris and the downfall of empires. In this view, its sudden destruction was not a memory of floods or fire, but a metaphor, a lesson crafted by a philosopher to warn Athens of the dangers of pride and excess. The single day and night of ruin was not a date in history, but a symbol written into story. And so Atlantis remains caught between disaster and allegory. For some, it is remembered in the blast of Santorini, the fury of tsunamis, and the fire of comets. For others, it exists only in words, a mirror held up to human ambition. What unites every telling is the same haunting image, a world at its height, erased in an instant. Atlantis lives on in that vision, a civilization that, whether real or imagined, vanished overnight. If you are still here with us, press like so, we know you are listening. In the 21st century, Atlantis grew even larger in popular imagination. In 2001, Disney brought it to life in Atlantis, the Lost Empire. The film portrayed a dazzling city beneath the sea, powered by glowing crystals and filled with life. For children, this was the first time they saw Atlantis not as a ruin, but as a living civilization, a place of beauty and wonder. 17 years later, Aquaman imagined it again, this time as a vast underwater kingdom divided into realms. Coral towers, neon weapons, and immense battles filled the screen. Millions watched as Atlantis returned once more, not as memory or theory, but as a vivid world alive in colour and sound. Through these films, Atlantis became part of global culture, a legend reborn for modern eyes. But Atlantis is not only found in stories and films, it has also shaped belief. In 2015, anthropologists surveyed Americans about their views on history. Nearly 60% agreed that advanced civilizations may have existed long before the first recorded societies. For many, Atlantis was the most obvious example. Some imagined shining towers rising above the Atlantic. Others saw it as a memory of drowned cities, half forgotten but never lost. The survey showed that Atlantis was no longer just a myth told by Plato or retold by novelists. It had become part of how people imagine the human past. To believe in Atlantis was to accept that history might be deeper, stranger, and older than the textbooks admit. Modern science has only deepened this sense of mystery. In 2020, a team of researchers flew over the jungles of Guatemala with LiDAR, a laser technology that can map the ground beneath dense forest. As the beams cut through the canopy, computers revealed an astonishing sight. Thousands of hidden structures, pyramids, causeways, and sprawling cities of the ancient Maya appeared on the screens. Entire networks of plazas and roads stretched across the landscape, invisible for centuries yet still present beneath the trees. These cities had thrived for hundreds of years before collapsing and being reclaimed by the jungle. Until technology uncovered them, they had all but vanished from human memory. For many who saw the images, the Maya cities were proof that civilizations can disappear almost completely. They reminded us that Atlantis too could have stood somewhere long ago, erased by time, flood, or catastrophe. This is why Atlantis endures. It is not only a puzzle of archaeology or a playground for fiction, it is a warning. The story speaks of a society at the height of power, confident in its wealth, proud of its knowledge, and certain of its strength. Yet in a single night, it was undone. Volcanoes can bury cities. Seas can rise and swallow kingdoms. Comets can strike with devastating force. And pride can blind societies to the dangers that surround them. Atlantis is a mirror, showing us what can happen when ambition grows without limit, and when arrogance blinds a people to their own fragility. The lesson of Atlantis is clear. Wealth and power cannot make us invincible. Technology cannot save us if it is used without wisdom. A civilization may build towers that reach the sky and machines that conquer the seas, but if it loses respect for nature and balance with the world, all of it can be swept away. Plato may have written the story as a moral tale, but across centuries it has become more than that. It has become a reflection of human ambition and a warning of how quickly greatness can fade. Today, as seas rise and climates shift, the voice of Atlantis feels closer than ever. Whether it was real or imagined, the story teaches humility. It reminds us that survival depends not only on what we build, but on how wisely we live. Atlantis shows us that brilliance shines brightest when paired with wisdom, and that pride, when left unchecked, leads even the mightiest cities into the depths. Beneath the surface of the oceans lie vast landscapes we have barely begun to explore. Sonar scans and deep-sea dives suggest that ridges, plateaus, and valleys stretch for thousands of miles, many of them still unmapped. Some researchers have wondered if hidden there, far below the reach of sunlight, may rest not one Atlantis, but many. Drowned cities, forgotten ports, or entire cultures erased by waves and time. Each survey of the seabed is like lifting a corner of a dark curtain, showing us that the world still keeps secrets beyond imagination. It raises a haunting thought. If a powerful civilization could vanish in a single night, leaving almost no trace but memory, how secure is the world we live in today? We build towers of glass and steel, send ships across oceans, and connect continents with light. Yet history and myth whisper that nothing made by human hands is beyond the reach of nature. Perhaps that is why Atlantis endures, not only as a legend of the past but as a question about the present. Could what happened once happen again? If these mysteries stir your imagination, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Atlantis was real? Or only a lesson told in story? Subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of history, and let these tales carry you gently into sleep. Good night.